Right. I see people are starting to join in. Thanks everyone for coming. This is our Manufacturing Hardware Accelerator info session. We're going to get started in just a few moments as everybody gets in. Get our slides up. Okay, so we'll get started. So like I said, this is our Rev Ithaca Manufacturing Hardware Accelerator info session. Applications are open now. So we'll talk a little bit about what the application process looks like, some expectations for the program, and basically the ins and outs of how the program works. Since we are in webinar format, you're welcome to put questions in as we go through in the chat or in Q&A. If we get questions that are specific to a slide and I can tackle them as we go, I will. Otherwise, we'll have some time at the end to take questions, but please don't feel like you need to hold your questions to the end. Feel free to jump in as we go through the slides. So my name is Deanna Coker. I'm the Assistant Director of the Hardware Programs, the Prototyping and Manufacturing Accelerator that we have. And my colleagues Ken Rother and Steve Supron will be joining this call as well. And Gianna is here with us, going to be helping me with Q&A to get through all of our questions for today. So like I said, we're going to kind of go through the ins and outs of the programs today. We're going to start with our philosophy, how this all works, how our hardware programs run, and how specifically we adapt that to manufacturing. The program goals, we'll talk a little bit about positioning in the pipeline for a hardware product. The program structure, so what you should expect, and then expectations and resources that we offer through the program. So Ken is the founding director of our hardware programs. He is going to be joining us a little bit late today, so he'll be around for questions at the end, and we'll be jumping in the next couple minutes. So Ken runs a number of our different hardware programs, as well as a few different programs and classes at Cornell. And he's worked as an entrepreneur in his own background and was the managing director of eLab and things like that. So Ken has a lot of experience in the space and is really our guru for all things hardware. And then, as I mentioned, my name is Deanna Coker. I'm the assistant director. I've been with the programs for going on 2 years now. My background is in mechanical engineering and product design, and have been working with a variety of different companies from AgTech to climate tech to basically all other things hardware for the last couple of years. So really enjoy these programs and happy to talk about a little bit more of the ins and outs of that as we go through. I'm also the technical team lead here, so we'll talk a little bit about what that looks like and what that means, how we can support you in developing the technical aspects of your product. So our philosophy for all of our hardware programs is that we really want to push the simultaneous development of a business model and your technology. Doesn't really do you all that much good as a startup to have technology but not know who to sell it to. And on the flip side, it doesn't do you all that much good to know exactly who your customer is and what a solution is, but you don't have the technology or the right people to build it. So we really push those things in parallel. You'll see that throughout our hardware programs. We practice the lean startup methodology, so we're very focused on using resources widely and testing as you go through the process. Very involved with the customer. If you've been involved with Rev in any way before, or you've heard the term customer discovery, we push that very hard around here, making sure that everyone understands their customer so that when you get to your launch and you get to your sales, you know exactly who that customer is, what they need, and how to sell them. We provide what we consider comprehensive support. So we really try to do our best to connect entrepreneurs with the right resources to help them succeed, whether that's business mentorship, technical support, connections in the area, manufacturers, things like that. Help do whatever we can to move the entrepreneur forward and validate throughout the whole process. We really want to make sure that, you know, the big difference between a hardware startup and a large hardware company is going to be your access to resources. So we want to validate at every step in that process to make sure that you're working out the bugs as you get started. The manufacturing program started in 2020. This is our third active cohort now. We're now recruiting for our fourth cohort. We've had 38 teams come through the program so far and have raised about $4 million in capital from those teams that have joined. We have some great success stories along the way. So Heat Inverse is one of the big manufacturing companies manufacturing teams, along with Ashlon Energy. And in the middle here, we have Wisely, which is a team that's in our cohort now that has won an SBIR grant among some other funding opportunities. So we've had some great successes come out of the program. So the program really pushes through a couple of key aspects. We're focused on kind of the earlier stage, the pre-manufacturing type space. We'll talk a little bit more about that positioning in a minute, but we're going to focus a little bit on three main things. So documentation for scale. So how do you get to a product spec, develop and refine your bill of materials and build your first mechanical drawing sets, design for manufacturability, assembly, serviceability, all of these different design for X components. And usually that means looking at engineering validation tests, manufacturing processes, things like that. And then lastly, another key aspect, like I said, we're pushing technical and business development at the same time. So we also do have a focus on finding funding sources, making sure that you can find your customers. So looking at your costs and your cash flow, securing capital, really working through some of those business model canvas boxes that you might not explore early on. So how do you reach your customer? How do you make sure you're sustainable as a business, manage your own financials, things like that. All right, so here's the positioning that I like to talk about. Like I said, we're kind of in the pre-manufacturing space. So we really work with teams who are anywhere from a later stage prototype, right? You're starting to figure out exactly what your product's needs are, up through someone that maybe has their first engineering prototype or working through the engineering validation stage. But we kind of operate in the space between engineering, prototype, and design validation testing. We don't normally get too much into production validation where we start talking about, how do you manage really large runs? How do you handle quality control, things like that at a very high volume? We don't necessarily get to that area. We've worked with some teams who do get there, but we focus more on that early stage. I have my first functional prototype, or I have my first fully built model, and I need to now take this and turn it into an engineering prototype, work through some of this engineering validation testing, and so on. So that's really where we fit into the grand scheme of a hardware company's journey. We have two main tracks in this program. We have an AgTech track and a classic track. And generally speaking, I'm going to start with the classic track because the classic track is everything that's not AgTech. It's a straightforward way to put it. So if it's a hardware concept and it doesn't fit in AgTech, then it's in the classic track. Our AgTech track is specific to supporting the ag sector. We, of course, being located in the Northeast, are partial to some of those companies who have an interest in farming in the Northeast or ag products in the Northeast, but we're open to AgTech across different areas as well. So anything that's really going to build and support in the ag sector is fair game for this program. What does that look like? So our AgTech track is sponsored by U.S. Economic Development Administration program grant, and really expands to include any ag tech, food tech that's hardware. So it can be cutting down environmental impacts of farming. Maybe you have an alternate farming tool that is, electric instead of a traditional diesel or gas device. Focusing on food security and climate protection as well. So anything really kind of around that space. It does not include food products specifically. We have different programs for that. But if it's something that is touching food or working with food or is tangential to the ag space but might interact with ag, then there's a good chance that you might fit into our AgTech track. Historically, that's included concepts like farming equipment, so robotics, autonomy, crop protection, through to weeding systems, livestock support systems, health and safety aspects on the farm, and like I said, food processing equipment, anything that might come into contact with food or be building on a food product. And our classic track, like I said, simply, it's all other hardware products, anything else that's not AgTech. Some previous examples that we've worked with include things like medtech, so early detection and condition prevention. We've worked with some devices there, but we're working with therapeutic devices and diagnostic devices. Textiles, we worked a little bit in this area with sustainable smart fabrics. Social good, we have had some nonprofits work through us as well. So we had a company that is in our current cohort that's working on smart blankets to prevent infant hypothermia. But the big catch here is that it has to be hardware in some way. We always say software wrapped in plastic. That doesn't necessarily mean that you have electronics or you have to have software, but there has to be a physical element to your product that is not food. So we've had a number of different teams come through the program. If you are not quite sure if you fit the bill, I encourage you to apply and we can help you work through that. But has to have some physical element, has to be some type of hardware. So in order to apply, we do have a couple of criteria for this program, and I will walk through those. So you have to have formed a legal entity of some sort, whatever type of legal entity you might be. You have to have rights to the intellectual property behind your design if you've already filed for IP, or you have to have a plan to license the IP if you have that type of model in place. You should have some evidence of product market fit. This can take a number of different forms. So basically, we're not looking for something specific here, but you should be making an argument to us that you know that you have a customer, you have a market, and you also have a solution for the problem of that customer. That looks like a number of different things depending on the company and your exact positioning. It could be that you have an email list of X number of people who are really interested in following your product. It could be that you have launched a Kickstarter or in the middle of a Kickstarter, which is a very good way to validate you have a product that people want. It might be that you have some other grant funding or something like that. There's a number of different ways you can prove this. I'm happy to take any questions on this if there are questions at the end of the presentation. Next, we're looking for viable working prototypes. So if you are a hardware company and you haven't yet made any prototypes, then this might not be the right program for you. We have some other programs that might be more appropriate. We're really looking for products that are approaching the MVP stage. So you might not be at an MVP just yet, but you have a working prototype that demonstrates most of your core functionality for your product. If you don't yet have an MVP, then what you'll see in our application is that we ask you what stage your prototype is at. Do you have a works-like prototype that has all of your functionality, a looks-like prototype that maybe shows how it's going to look, feel, and those types of things, but doesn't have the functionality? Or can you properly assess where your prototype is at? So we're really looking for someone that's in that later stage functional prototype, moving towards an MVP space. But an honest assessment of your prototype is always helpful. We're happy to meet you where you're at. Then we're looking for some expectations of funding. So you might have a grant, you might be looking into VC funding, you might have a plan to launch a Kickstarter. All we're looking for is that you have an expectation of how you're going to carry your product from that initial prototype, which is probably going to be relatively cheap, to funding the manufacturing of your product. You don't need to have that funding in place just yet, but you should be able to explain to us how you're going to get that funding so that the design, development, the inputs that we're giving you are going to lead to a functional product. And then we do, prefer that there are two people on a team. It's not a requirement at all, but at this stage in the game, having just one person being a solo founder can be pretty difficult. So either plans to recruit a co-founder or having a dedicated co-founder can be very helpful for your application, for providing a stronger application. You can also, of course, have more than two members. I should follow up with that as well. You're not limited to just two people. If you have a larger team, you're still welcome to apply, but the solo founder can be a little bit tough at this stage. So it is something that we consider in applications. Okay, so a little bit about this program structure. So walk through a little bit of the framework here. So we do have an in-person kickoff. We're going to talk about that in a little bit. This is a predominantly virtual program, and the in-person kickoff is one of the main times where we will be asking you to travel to Ithaca, but generally the content is going to be delivered virtually. We're going to go through defining your MVP. So that documentation aspect, how do you lay out what your MVP is, know what your customer needs and what your initial market is going to require of you in your product. We'll talk about how you plan for scale. What does that look like? We talked a little bit about financials. So how do you plan and prepare yourself for a scale launch? What expectations should you have? And then validation and testing. So we'll go through a lot of that along the way. It's either going to be early validation and testing or the regulatory end of validation and testing, depending on your product and where you're at. We provide individual support. So again, you'll have collaboration with our hardware team. I'm going to talk about that in a few minutes. And you'll also have one-on-one meetings with an assigned EIR, an entrepreneur in residence. That's going to be someone from our network that has either founded their own company or was a C-suite type executive in a company that has experience to help advise you, guide you along this journey. So you'll have both of those on an individual level, and then you'll also have structured group content. So these are going to be our regular sessions that are going to be virtual, Mondays and Wednesdays afternoons. And we'll have some Friday sessions as well. So you're going to have a mix of collaborative group sessions as well as those one-on-one type formats where you might be meeting with our technical team or with your business mentor. Ken, looks like you just joined. Did you want to introduce yourself quickly? You're muted.
And now I'm not muted. Hey, everybody, I'm Ken Rother. I am the director of the hardware programs at Rev. I'm a colleague of Deanna and Gianna's. Been involved with the hardware, like founding them and launching the hardware programs from the very beginning. You're in more than capable hands with Deanna explaining stuff, and I'll be here for the remainder and if the Q&A session. I'm happy to jump in. Nice to meet you all.
Now I can't. There we go. All right, so we'll walk through a couple of these elements. Like I mentioned, the kickoff is going to be in person. That's your welcome to the program, chance to meet other teams in the cohort, meet our staff, get oriented with the shop stays, with how we're set up here in Ithaca. We're going to go through product roadmaps. That's more of a way to get us all on board with where you're going and what we should expect. Also to look at the timelines, make sure things make sense, what fits into this program, what doesn't. So that'll be our chance to get everybody on board and set some goals. We'll go through shop training and introductions. Like I mentioned, we will do some shop training for teams who might be in the area or out of the area. The shop's mostly going to be available to teams who are local to Ithaca. Otherwise, you'll be working through our technical team. And then we'll have some manufacturing site visits. So this is something that we really enjoy doing. We will be going to a couple of local manufacturers, get a chance to talk to the leads at those companies, to see their sites, see their facilities, get a sense for how you might evaluate different manufacturing options, how you compare and decide who to work with. So that'll be an introduction to working with some of the local manufacturers. And then we're going to go into the defining your MVP chunk, and this is really focusing on that documentation aspect that I mentioned. So we're going to go through and do an MRL and a TRL, which is a manufacturing readiness or a technical readiness assessment. Helps you get a sense of where your product is in the overall scope of preparedness to launch. So we'll go through those and have some templates for those. We'll talk about pilot testing. Like I mentioned, validating the whole way through this process. How do you understand the risks associated? How do you de-risk systematically? So we'll talk about different ways you can do pilot tests, from really early stage pilots to full-scale betas, things like that. We're going to do a business model canvas refresh. That'll be talking about some of those other areas, maybe looking at revenue streams, something that you need to flesh out as you build financials, things like that, and creating your product spec. So that'll be kind of the wrap up, is how do you create a final product spec? What does it look like? What do you need it for? Then planning for scale, we'll start talking about that planning components, to costs, expectations, things like that around getting to your first short run or longer runs and what those look like. So we're going to go through funding sources. Like I mentioned, expectation is that you have some plan for funding sources. There might be other funding sources available. So we'll talk about what funding might be out there. Different manufacturing methods that might be appropriate, how you might design for them, or what expectations that you have around manufacturing methods that you could use. We're going to talk about contract manufacturing, when you'd want to work with a contract manufacturer, what to look for in a contract manufacturer, especially as a startup. What does a contract manufacturer look like that's going to be startup friendly, as opposed to one that might not be so startup friendly? So we'll talk about that. And then costing and financials. Like I mentioned, how do you handle tooling costs? What are the plans for funding tooling costs? What types of tooling costs are associated with your product and things like that? So how do you manage those financials as you plan for those longer runs? And then validation and testing, we're going to formally go through that product launch diagram that I had earlier that moves from, concept sketch up through production validation. So we'll talk about the engineering validation stage, EVT, design validation testing, DVT, and then production validation testing, PVT. We're not going to get too much into PVT, like I mentioned, but we'll really focus on that engineering validation and design validation. We will talk about regulatory requirements and certification. So that'll look very different depending on what type of device you have. If you have electronics and you're looking into UL and FCC versus if you're a med tech device and you're going through the FDA approval process. So you might be in different circumstances there depending on your specific product lane. And we'll talk about how you might manage some of those challenges, costs associated with certifications and things like that. Talk about QA and QC and how you manage quality assurance, quality control. And then how you might establish meaningful partnerships to help you go through some of this validation and testing and where you might need partners to help out with that. So the program expectations, right? So we talked a little bit about the format. Program is mostly virtual, but what's the commitment look like? It's mostly going to be about 10 hours a month and it's mostly virtual. So that's your baseline expectation, is that you've got 10 hours a month of content sessions and things like that in a virtual format. We expect on the flip side that your participation in all content sessions is going to be, you're going to be joining regularly. Your cameras are going to be on, you're engaged, interested in learning and working through some of our workshops and things like that. And then you'll have a monthly meeting with your assigned entrepreneur in residence. So that's going to be something that you'll schedule on your own, but we do expect that you have that monthly meeting with them since we're setting you up with that resource, with that mentor. This is a virtual program. Like I said, our focus is on content and prototyping support. We're going to talk about that prototyping support in a few minutes, but you want to go through and understand that mostly virtual, but you will have some hands-on aspects. We'll be able to ship things back and forth, and you're going to get that development support that you might not otherwise have access to. And everybody's going to sign a participation agreement if you get into the program prior to the start of the program that's going to outline these different expectations. All right, so what does that look like? What are the resources that we're providing to you? The main things that you should expect from this program is that you're going to get access to hardware workshops. So you're going to learn about the process, you're going to learn about launching your products. But then you're going to have access to that one-on-one support that I mentioned, that business mentorship with your assigned entrepreneur in residence and technical support from our product development team. So those are the main resources that you're really going to get out of this program. Access to the one-on-one mentorship, access to product development support, and then any of the formal content through our workshops. So what does that look like? I think we have some content missing here. So product development technical support team. So that's going to be a mix of different engineers who are on our staff that are going to be able to help with a variety of different services. That's something that we work through on a team by team basis. Basically the expectation here, and maybe there are, there's a weird set of transitions. Okay, so generally how we're going to run this, we'll work backwards here. It's a project-based support model. So if you have something that you're looking for support with, we'll talk through what a project might look like. What is it that you need? What is it that we can provide support with? And we're going to set an expectation of how much time, what the deadlines are, what that project looks like. Projects are going to run anywhere from 5 to 25 hours, depending on how complex the project is. If you just need something 3D printed, that's really easy. If we're working on developing the model to 3D print, that might take a little longer. I don't know how to get this all to show up at once. So basically, we're helping out with contract design and engineering. You can imagine, again, if you were working with a full company, rates for an engineer are usually $90 to $150 per hour, depending on the firm you're working with. Engineers don't come cheap, especially not good engineers. So the expected value of some of these projects is going to be up to about $3,000, $4,000. So that's our main contribution, is going to be that value of the engineering support and roughly what the project structure will look like. How do those projects work? So you're going to have product development technical support, projects approved based on timeline and team capability. So for the most part, we are going to be just working on, what is a reasonable timeline for our team? What's a reasonable timeline that will work for you if you had a smaller project that we were running? And does it have fit into our skill sets? If it doesn't fit into our skill sets, can we recommend something else or someone else to help you accomplish that, that task? Oh, this one's all funky too. All right. So what does that look like in terms of materials? You know, where does all this come from? So we keep a general stock of different materials and supplies and equipment. So anything that we have, you're basically going to have access to through our team. So that includes a variety of different materials, variety of different options of rapid prototyping equipment. But generally speaking, if it's something that we have in-house that we're using a regular amount of, we're going to provide that. If it's something special that you need for your product, so maybe you need a specialty filament or you need a specialty resin for 3D printing, then we're asking the teams to provide that, but free use of our machines, free use of any of the design elements around that. And we do normally stock all of our standard prototyping materials, from aluminums to plywoods and things like that, to make some quick mock-ups and things of that nature. So just to build on that, what does our facility actually look like? We have 2 different laser cutters, a handful of desktop CNCs, variety of 3D printers. That collection is always growing. We have both FDM printers, standard filament extrusion printers, as well as the SLA resin printers. We have a couple of nice form labs, a full electronics bench, assembly space, and the technical staff team to support any incoming projects. So when we have something that's outside of the scope of what we do here, there's a couple of ways we can work through this, but this is what our shop looks like and the main resources that you would have available to you. And like I mentioned, if you were a team that was located in Ithaca, you'd have direct access to any of this equipment. We go through shop training. So depending on where you're located, that might be available. For the most part, our expectation is that teams are virtual and your access to this equipment is through our staff team. So the application process is pretty straightforward. We'll talk a little bit about what that looks like. Basically, when you submit your application, it's pretty short. You submit your application, we review it as it comes in. What we're looking for in the application is a review of your value proposition, your customer, that plans for scale. So again, that might be your funding model or what funding you already have, or how you're planning to get some, and then an evaluation of your prototype. That's the basics. It's pretty straightforward. We review the submission. We would set up a 30-minute interview with Ken, myself, and maybe other members of our team, talk a little bit more about what's in that application, hear a little bit more of your plans, what your interests are in the program, and what you'd expect to accomplish in the program. And then we'd get back to you within 2 weeks of that interview. So if you are asked to interview, you hear back promptly. We're reviewing applications on a rolling basis, so you're welcome to apply anytime now through the end of September. And you could hear from us, you know, days to weeks after when your application is submitted, but you would hear back from us on that rolling basis. It wouldn't be waiting until the end of September. So the main program dates, like we said, there's main content delivery. This is going to be Mondays and Wednesdays in the afternoons. It's going to be, you know, bi-weekly for the most part. We're going to lessen that main content delivery over the course of the program. So you'll have more of that structured content up front. And then it'll lessen up, you'll take on more individual type content towards the end of the program. But in general, you should assume Monday and Wednesday afternoons on a roughly bi-weekly basis. We'll have guest speakers on Fridays. So that'll be afternoons on Friday, roughly 1 a month. Your mentor meetings, that's your entrepreneur and residence meetings. Those are your choice to schedule with your EIR. So if you are in a different time zone, you can work with that. You'll have those virtual meetings at your choice. Those are normally hour-long meetings. And then technical meetings, also your choice. You don't necessarily have to meet with us. You could meet with us twice a week. It'll be defined by the projects that you have ongoing and what the required meeting schedule is, and we'll talk those out. But those are also going to be scheduled your choice. It'll be something along the lines of setting up a Calendly meeting based on what we work out as a team with your company. So that's all formally what I have for today. Applications are open. Deadline is September 25th. Like I mentioned, it's on a rolling basis. If you have questions, feel free to reach out to us. We're happy to provide answers, provide any feedback that we can. You can learn more about us at our website. I am going to turn it over now. Ken, do you have anything that you want to add? And then we have questions, but Ken, I'll let you jump in if there's any.
I do not. I mean, I've been trying to answer a few questions as we go, and I'll continue to do that. But let's just open it up to questions. And please don't just ask them, because if you're thinking it, other people are thinking it too. So yeah.
I think we did have a question about the engineering support, and I just want to clarify to make sure that came through, that the engineering support we provide is not a charge to you. That is the main thing we're providing through this program. So if you join this program, there's no cost to join. We are giving you that resource of engineering development. And the only thing that we would expect you to potentially invest in is if there was some equipment you needed that we didn't have, or there was a material you needed that we didn't have. That would be the only costs of working with the technical team. So I just wanted to clarify that, because we did have a question on that. Yeah, I can start with the Q&A box. Okay. So we had a question on electronics design prototyping experience, but need guidance with scaling up a manufacturing process for a polymer and an optical design. Ken, do you want to speak to any unique experience that we might have?
Yeah, I was just typing on that one. So, that's one of those ones. And for everybody, we'll interview everybody and we'll have this conversation of exactly where you are, where you think you are, where we think you are, what help you need. We're pretty connected to a bunch of folks in Rochester, which is a big optics hub. They have a program there called Luminate. So, we'll figure out if we can help you and directly, and or make intros and or make significant intros into other programs. So once we get to understand you, better, that's definitely something we can help for. But specifically on the optics side, we're very well connected to a group in Rochester that's very big in photonics.
And then we had another question about an early stage company that's working on a second product. Is that still a fit?
Totally.
So, funding outside of the prototyping. Ken, do you want to take that one outside of the engineering support?
Yeah. So there's no direct funding from this program. The funding we provide is in the form of these projects, and it's possible you'll have more than one project, depending. Again, we'll discuss it during the interview. But no, we will help you prepare for funding. I think we are. There's a number of us who work in various capacities, teaching entrepreneurship, both at the business school, at Cornell Engineering, and working in various commercialization programs. I'm an I-Corps instructor. Deanna's worked in I-Corps. So we're going to help you get ready for funding, which often, as we find, is that takes a lot of work. But no, we don't provide funding directly. That's the kind of funding you need to get into manufacturing is pretty significant. Someone else referenced Kickstarter. That's one I believe in pretty strongly, and we can certainly help you work on that kind of avenue to funding. Work with you building, helping you get a campaign together, connecting you to people who've done successful hardware Kickstarters. So that's kind of how we think about it. Is there a relationship with Weil? We know quite well the woman who runs the BioVenture eLab there at Cornell Weil. We also have a colleague, Greg Ray, who's quite involved in bio-entrepreneurship. So that's a big question. It depends what you're trying to validate. It's not like there's a receiving door where they take in new things, but can we start that process of at least maybe pointing you in the right direction? Yeah. Yes. Again, we'll discuss it during interview, get a sense of what you're talking about, but there's, so we're pretty well connected, but I can't guarantee they're going to want to work with you.
There was a question on IP that I think was answered, but it's worth calling out to the group. We do not take equity. We are not taking any stock in your IP. If we help with development, it is not ours. It is still yours. I don't know, Ken, if you want to add to that, but I know that's a common question.
So look, you own your IP. We don't take equity. We don't take IP, as Deanna mentioned. If you come from a university environment and you licensed your IP, that's your relationship with them. Cornell, even though we are a Cornell property, you're not giving anything to Cornell, so it's easy. And from that perspective, whatever other core IP relationships you have around licensing, that's completely your business. Now we can help you talk about it and help you think about it and maybe get you connected to some resources. I do want to, for those of you that are New York State residents, we're joined today by Patty, who runs Fuse Hub, and Fuse Hub is an MEP, a manufacturing extension partner that covers the state. And they run a number of commercialization competitions. They have one running now that can offer you up to $50K of funding. There's different versions of this competition. So if you look at the Fuse Hub site, some of them you're partnering directly with a nonprofit like ours, and the money kind of flows through us and it goes to us to help you create a process. In some cases, it goes directly to you. So the big message is Fuse Hub, FUZEHUB. Check out their site, especially if you're New York State based. Look at they have some links around competitions, and there might be something there, but applications are open now.
Connections with manufacturers abroad. I'll just jump in on that one quick. So we have, kind of like I mentioned, we have plenty of local manufacturers that we have in our ecosystem that will go and we'll tour and we'll visit, but that does not mean we're exclusive to local manufacturers. We don't necessarily have a ton of international connections. We more help you manage that relationship with the manufacturer. If you find a specific manufacturer for your specific component, your specific product, we'll help manage that that relationship. We might make some recommendations of manufacturers we've worked with in the past, but that's really going to depend on the specific product and what you're looking for. And yes, we have CAD people. Since I saw that just jump up, that's an easy one. We have plenty of CAD people. Okay. Can design for test and manufacturing test? Do you want that one?
Sure. Where is that one? Oh, here we go. So when you say resources, we're going to help. We're going to help you figure out what you need to do, obviously, and for those steps. We've had some relationships with people like Intertech, which does regulatory type testing. But yeah, we are going to go through all of the DFX, all of the elements of DFX to help you prepare. We're also going to recommend a book, and I'll just recommend it out loud now. The author is a woman named Anna Thornton from Boston University. And it's a book, I think it's called Product Realization, Going from 1 to a Million. And Anna's book is really, in my mind, the seminal book on taking hardware products to market. And it covers all of this, and we're going to use that book. So we don't teach to it like it's a course, but it is, I've recommended it to a zillion people, including hardware engineers at Tesla and Apple. And they all love it. So that's something we're going to use as a reference. But yeah, we're going to definitely, help you with that aspect when you're ready for it. Thank you for putting that in the chat.
There's a raised hand. I'm going to allow him to talk.
Okay.
Oh, I didn't see that. Who else we got?
Do we have a question? Pupe, did you have a question?
Yes. Sorry, I was trying to find the unmute button. So, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. So we have an ice cream brand, and in our brand, we need different machinery, and we're trying to come up with a machine that will help, or machines that will help to eliminate the spreading of allergens with the food process, because it's a big problem. And our ice cream is based upon that. We're still also working on our packaging and things of that nature. Is this program something, because I saw food processing, is that something that we would fit into? Because from what I heard, it sounds like it's a little bit more hardware focused, but I just want to make sure, because I don't want to count myself out if that's not the case.
We'll discuss it during the interview, but probably the answer might be very well yes. It might be no, but it might be very well yes. Part of our funding comes from the EDA, a particular grant called University Centers to help with AgTech. they draw a pretty big circle on what is ag tech, and it sounds like including processing. And we've had other sort of processing like technologies in this program and other programs that we're connected to. So yeah, let's go over the particulars during your interview. Please apply. Please apply. Don't rule yourself out, any of you. And then we'll get into it and see. And if we can't, we got a lot of colleagues, Cornell, big ag school. If we're not the right thing, we'll try and help you find the right thing. Let's figure out the right thing.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Looks like we have another raised hand. Oh, okay.
Any other questions?
So we have one more, we have a couple more that jumped into the chat. So maybe we'll start with the easy one, connection to Grow New York.
So Grow New York. Our program, if Deanna didn't mention this earlier, we are all part of something called the Center for Regional Economic Advancement at Cornell. So our paychecks are Cornell. Some of us are faculty, some of us are staff, and some of us are both. One of Cornell's other major programs, and our close colleague Jen Smith runs, is a competition called Grow New York, which is a big ag competition. We're in year 5. There's going to be at least one more year, I think, if not more. Yeah, we are very related to Grow New York, and you will have access to chatting with the people from Grow New York who oversee it. Any questions that you may have, presumably going into the next cycle. But for those of you interested, yeah, the event, I think, is the Monday, Tuesday, mid-November, 14, 15 in Binghamton. We can get the particulars out, but if you're interested in the ag side, it's a fantastic competition and a fantastic trade show. But yes.
And then, so question on helping with filing provisional utility design patents. So this one, we have a number of different resources that we can help connect you with for this. We, like specifically us, are not going to be helping you file those, but we have some different partners that can either help you go through that process or make recommendations. We have a couple of startup friendly firms around here that can help with that as well. So we don't directly do it. We don't have direct like micro grants that can cover it, but we're pretty good at helping connect you to the right people to get that moving.
Yeah. And if you are New York State based, one of the groups we'll connect you to is a group called the New York State Technology Licensing Clinic or something up in Syracuse. They're very nice people. But otherwise, we got some others. Lawyers aren't free, but some clinics are, though.
Looks like we have a specific question about whether or not a company's a fit. And I think, Ken, to your point, the answer to that's probably apply. And we'll talk about that in the interview. Don't know if you have any comments for that.
Yeah, now I'm just reading your post here. Man, I'm really sorry about your situation in the Ukraine. Let's talk during the interview. See if there's something we can do, or find you somebody, find you some connection. But please apply, and let's see what we can do. Sorry about your situation. Wow.
Are there any other questions? I think we've touched on most of these.
But as you know, there's been a couple on the ag. Definitely, we're interested in ag. Like, whether it's processing, managing it in the ground, getting it out of the ground, turning it into a food, turning waste into something useful, all of that. We're very interested in all of those and have helped many teams over the years in all sorts of things in this program and other programs. Yeah, please apply.
So we had a great point that Gianna just raised to me, just to rehash this. You don't have to be based in Ithaca. You don't have to be based in New York. The biggest thing that we're going to ask is that if you're on the other side of the world, you're going to have a time zone difference to handle for our content sessions. So you do not have to be based in New York. You do not have to be based in Ithaca. Just be aware that there's going to be a time zone hurdle.
Yes, it is less than 100 degrees.
Yes,
Especially in the winter.
yeah, and we don't make you come in the winter, unless you like snow. That's not Ithaca behind me, by the way, that's Whistler, British Columbia. But,
So if there aren't any other questions, I think kind of the name of the game here is if you're interested, apply. We will chat with you. Once you've applied, we can figure out any more. If we have other questions, we'll reach out. Otherwise, we'll set up an interview. There are humans on the end of every application. It's the humans that are on this call. I like to let people know that they're not going off into the abyss. Gianna put the application link in the chat. So if you didn't grab it from the QR code, it is in the chat still. And I think that's probably it. Okay, looking forward to seeing these applications come in. We will have another info session. If you know other people that might be interested, we'll have another info session coming up. Happy to chat with anyone specifically, and we'll look forward to seeing you all in an interview. All right.
Bye, guys. Thanks.